Why do I do this to myself? Disclaimer, while there is a dedicated spoiler section for the story, the rest of the video will feature gameplay spoilers. Also, I'm not covering arenas because I didn't play it very much. What do you think I am? Some kind of professional reviewer that actually knows what he's doing? I don't know shit.
DivideZero.
Sifu is a beat-em-up game released in February of 2022. This one has been on my radar for a long time, probably since its original release, but due to its exclusivity on a certain platform of the Grand Persuasion, I decided to wait until it came to Steam before playing. Then it did, and I still didn't play it. I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people that buys enough games for a lifetime every time Steam has a seasonal sale. Then I proceed to play absolutely none of them. I don't know why I was made this way. But, as the saying goes, better late than never. So, let's jump in. Sifu begins with a prologue. You are a mysterious individual surgically fighting through what looks to be a martial arts school. There is no health bar or anything like that in this sequence. It's both an intro to the plot and a tutorial in one. After moving through numerous rooms, you finally reach the goal, the room of the Sifu himself. The dialogue, little as it may be, infers that your character has some clear history with him, but that'll come later. Also, you'll notice the many people you've assaulted this place alongside, giving the impression that this is some kind of targeted attack or hostile takeover. A student earlier in the level even remarks on your character, called Yang, having the guts to come back. From this, we can infer that he was a student himself. What follows next is a scripted fight where you are set to defeat the Sifu in combat. You learn quickly after his defeat that there is a child hidden nearby and Yang calls them out. Leaving their hiding space, the child stands defiant, or as defiant as one can be against a room of full-grown adults. Yang, clearly deciding the child is a loose end, orders one of his allies to eliminate him. But the kid isn't dead. I mean, obviously, otherwise there'd be no game. He clutches onto a glowing talisman and reaches for his neck, noting that his killing wound is now gone. Whatever the talisman is, it saved his life. Even so, it was not enough to save the life of the Sifu, who we now learn to be his father. And then a hyper-stylized training intro begins, presenting us with the 5 figures we will be taking down over the game. The botanist, the fighter, the artist, the CEO, and the leader himself, Yang. One by one, you take on these darkened visions of them, clearly symbolic of how our character himself views these individuals. Not as people, but as figures made entirely of dark energy, as dark forces that need to be stopped. And as you defeat the final force representing Yang himself, the title appears. This intro is great. The prologue has a ton of atmosphere and creates a great amount of mystery as to what's going on. Playing as the bad guy at the start of the game is a trope, but it's used to great effect here, so I don't mind at all. And I don't care what anyone says, we need more hyper-stylized training montages like these. It doesn't even need to be a training montage, just give me training style montages of people doing random shit. Speaking of style, we gotta talk about the graphics. I'm not sure who said this first, but there's a saying that a great art style never ages. In saying that, I think Sifu will absolutely be one of those games with time. There's no better way to put it, this game is gorgeous. Despite running on Unreal, it doesn't fall into any of the trappings that engine tends to come with. There is a solid balance of detail and style, making for a look that is wholly unique to the game and looks stunning. I had multiple instances during my playthrough where I had to slow down just to observe the levels around me. Just like the graphical fidelity itself, the animations are also fantastic. This in particular was something they really needed to get right for a game like this to work, as poor or stiff animations could have easily led to the gameplay feeling less intuitive and clunky. But thankfully, it's the opposite. The best word I can use to describe it is smooth. Everything just feels and looks natural. Whenever I misread an enemy's attack, it's not because the game didn't feed me enough information, but because I wasn't paying attention or reacting fast enough. The cutscenes, few and far between as they may be, combined these visual elements together masterfully with some great direction. But there is one other key element you can't overlook when style is involved, and that's sound. Sifu's sound design is also good for the most part. Hit animations combined with solid sounds give all your attacks a satisfying amount of feedback. Weapons in particular feel great to use, especially the metal pipe.
fuck you doing in here, pal?
For some reason, I also really like the UI sounds in this game. I can't quite put my finger on it, but even when I'm dying, which you'll be doing a lot, getting back up feels so damn satisfying. The music is also good. It fits into that category of not super memorable but works great for the game. There's a mix of more modern electronic tracks and more traditional Chinese instrumentation. I don't know shit about music, but going by ear, the music sounded more than appropriate. The nightclub song is also an absolute banger. The only place where some may argue the sound stumbles is in the voice acting. It's a difficult topic to discuss because on one hand, I think all the voice actors are playing to very specific, mostly stoic archetypes, which kinda hinders their ability to show a lot of range. At the same time, I think it's fair critique to say that almost everyone talks and sounds the same because they pretty much do. This problem extends into the characters themselves, who I will get more into in spoilers, but the easiest way to word it is this. All the main characters have unique appearances and fighting styles that make them stand out as bosses, but as characters themselves, they may as well be a single person, and this will have unfortunate consequences for the plot, but that's for later. It's time to talk about the main reason we're all here, the gameplay. Oh, don't worry, I'll get to the difficulty part sooner rather than later. Sifu is best described as a 3D beat-em-up, and that's true in more ways than one. There are 5 levels in total, each one being different from the last in minor ways gameplay-wise, but major ways in presentation. Each level follows a standard formula that you'll find yourself familiar with very quickly. Fight numerous enemies of various types in multiple locations before finally having a showdown with a titular boss. Looking at the number of levels and this kind of structure at their most basic level could falsely give you the impression that you are in for a shallow experience, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Sifu's core combat mechanics, as well as its roguelike style of replaying levels, turn what could have been a generic affair into something truly special and unique. Combat focuses on a mix of light and heavy attacks which can be strung together to make combos. As for defense, you have a standard block, but the game places most of its emphasis on the parry, dodge, and avoid mechanics. To summarize it quickly, I'll word it like this. Both you and your enemies have a health bar, as well as a yellow structure meter. Health works as you'd expect, but structure is different. Damaging an enemy or successfully parrying them will damage their structure, which when maxed will open them up for a finisher. This naturally means your structure can also be broken, except in your case, it will result in you falling to the ground, leaving you open to subsequent attacks. Now, the defensive maneuvers I previously mentioned will be your main ways of both dealing structure damage and avoiding it yourself. The parry is easy to learn but hard to master, requiring you to time block for the exact moment an enemy attack is about to land. If done correctly, it will negate their damage, hurt their structure, and possibly leave them open for a free attack. Dodging can be used to dodge many regular moves and can also be doubled up as a dash to either create or close the distance on enemies. The last move is the avoid. By holding block and using your movement, you can either do a high or low avoid. High avoids are used to dodge regular high attacks, whereas low avoids are specifically meant for low attacks such as leg sweeps. For one last mechanic I forgot to mention, there is focus. By playing well, you'll build up focus, which when full will allow you to slow down time and perform a special move on a single enemy. These allow you to get free stuns and the like, opening new opportunities in fights and giving free damage where you otherwise wouldn't get any. It's not amazing, but can be helpful in a pinch. All these moves are essential for you to use if you want to succeed in Sifu's combat, and ignoring any of them will lead you to defeat, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Sifu is a hard game. Not one of the hardest I have played personally, but it does not screw around. This is due to a few factors, so I'll try to be brief. The first is enemy attacks. Unlike most games focusing on melee combat, Sifu's enemies don't do wild swings to telegraph their moves. Instead, they are much closer to how they would look if used in real life, which makes reacting on the fly much harder, forcing you to learn the enemy's moves through trial and error. Having inherently fast reactions is a help, but it will only get you so far. The next reason is actually one of Sifu's most unique features, the age mechanic. When you die, a point is added to your death counter, and you will age by 1 year per death on your counter. The counter can be reduced by defeating specific special enemies in levels, but otherwise that counter will go up as you keep dying. Repeat deaths on single sections in particular are very much punished in this system, so you need to be careful. Thankfully, it's not completely unfair. Age works in milestones. You start at 20 and will age until you reach your 70s, at which point it's game over and you start your level again. For each decade you pass, your maximum health is reduced, however your damage is increased as a trade-off. The final reason for the difficulty combines these last two facts together. Whatever age you are when you finish a level, that is the age you will be when you start the next one, meaning if you get your ass kicked on one level and barely scrape by, you will be at a severe disadvantage heading into the next one. The only way to mitigate this is by going back and replaying the level again, taking care to play better in pursuit of a lower end age. This is one of the major reasons that despite the game being only 5 levels, it still takes some time to finish, as for most players, replaying your past levels will be essential to survive, as the later ages severely reduce the number of mistakes that you can make. Thankfully, even with these elements against you, Sifu doesn't just throw you to the dogs all the time. There is a unique progression system that offers you 2 types of upgrades as you play. The skill tree allows you to spend the XP you earn from beating levels on new fighting moves and abilities, like catching thrown weapons and parrying enemy attacks from the ground. Some of these are blatantly better than others, but many are very handy to have. At default, skills you obtain will only remain with you for the current run, but by unlocking them multiple times, you can get them permanently. In addition to the skill tree upgrades, there are also the shrine upgrades, which are found throughout the levels themselves. These offer far more substantial upgrades, but cannot be unlocked permanently. This can include having a larger structure meter, doing more damage with melee weapons, dealing more structure damage with parries, etc. Just like with skills, some of these are blatantly better than others, but the good ones are worth taking. There are also multiple enemy types, each requiring you to keep different attacks in mind when facing them. Some of the late game enemies can absolutely demolish you if you get greedy and don't approach them the right way. Enemies will sometimes mix in yellow non-parryable attacks, which require avoiding to not take damage. These do a great job of keeping you on your feet and preventing potential parry spam from taking over a fight. To touch on the last major part of the gameplay, there are the bosses. This should probably go without saying, but these fights are the highlights of Sifu, not to mention where the difficulty shines the most. Each of them is wholly unique in both their fighting styles, but especially their presentation, leading to some of the best looking boss fights I've had in a long time. Just like the rest of the game, these fights don't skim on the difficulty. The artist and Yang, the final boss, both gave me a lot of trouble in my initial fights with them that kept me busy for a good long while. And it's not cheap difficulty either. These fights aren't hard because of ridiculous single shot attacks or anything like that. It genuinely feels like you're in combat with worthy foes, and no matter what, it felt like I was losing due to mistakes on my part, not because of poor balance, which feels great to say. Not all the bosses are equal. Personally, I found the CEO's fight to be kinda bland, but that's just my personal thoughts. Overall, the gameplay is great, but there are some minor issues holding it back from perfection. To get the most common complaint out of the way, yes, the camera is a hunk of shit. Fighting near any kind of wall or corner is a surefire way to get yourself completely shit on. The best way I can describe it, It's like having a knife fight with a badger inside of a washing machine, except somehow even less appealing. Thankfully, I was lucky and didn't run into problems with the camera very often. Perhaps the camera gods were smiling on me this time. For another problem, I don't think the game does a very good job explaining how the avoid mechanic works. Aside from the optional in-game tutorials, it's not really explained at all, leading to a ton of initial frustration in some boss encounters, until I later discovered that the game wanted me to use the avoid mechanic. Except it wasn't communicated in an intelligent way. It reminded me a lot of Elden Ring, where the bosses are amazing once you understand them, but trying to figure them out can be an absolute headache depending on the strategies they require, as the game can be incredibly picky about which strategies it teaches you and which it doesn't. But like I said, it's a minor issue. By the time I defeated the second boss, I was already beginning to get to grips with it, and so it didn't have the time to ruin my experience. That all being said, there is a whole nother side to Sifu that I haven't covered, and it's covered by the veil of spoilers, so that's where we'll start. You know the drill by now. Skip to the timecode here if you don't want to get spoiled. The way Sifu tells its story is different to most other games. Once you begin the game after the prologue, most of the detailed narrative can be completely missed or skipped, and the parts which are placed in front of you are vague and can be interpreted in many ways. In all the levels you play, you can find pieces of information which will fill up your investigation board, slowly allowing you to piece together the narrative. Now, I was not able to find everything in the game, so some of what I'm about to discuss was found through research using outside sources. Plus, some things I just straight up did not understand on my initial playthrough. Yang, the leader, is implied to have been a student at the Sifu's martial arts school and was even a close friend or mentor to your main character before he killed your father. In the beginning, it would seem like Yang and the others killed your father out of pure malice, but as more information comes to light, the answers are a lot more nuanced. In the world of Sifu, there exists 5 elemental talismans, each one bearing a specific ability. They're not all explained as to their exact purpose, but some can be gleaned easily. The botanist has the wood talisman, which seems to grant him the power over plants. The CEO has the metal talisman, whose abilities I still don't quite get. The artist has the water talisman, which possibly explains her 2 fighting arenas, as well as water being a key tool in paint-based art. The fighter has the fire talisman, seemingly granting him the power to summon fire at will. The last one is Yang, who has the earth talisman, which not only seems to heal the sick and injured, but even resurrect the dead. Before the beginning of the game, those talismans were held and protected by various masters, as they believed them to be too powerful to use and at risk of abuse. The CEO herself was one of these masters, meaning she betrayed the others. Your father, the Sifu, was the protector of the Earth Talisman. All of this seemingly came to a head when one day Yang's wife and child became ill, and so he sought his master's help, hoping he would be allowed to use the Earth Talisman to save them. Of course, due to Sifu's belief in not using the talisman, he rejected Yang's proposal and his family died as a result. This would result in Yang forming a group with the other bosses you've hunted in the game with the intention of eliminating the masters and taking the talismans with the belief of using them for the good of the world. They believed that the masters hiding them was a waste of the potential good that these talismans could do. Of course, the results were varied. The botanist would use his power to produce drugs, the fighter would start his own dojo using barbaric trials and manipulation to gain new students, the artist would go mostly into solitude while her museum was mostly used as a front for illicit activity, the CEO would primarily use her talisman in the pursuit of business and more financial growth, and Yang himself would be the only one to keep his promise, using the talisman to create the sanctuary. There is even evidence in the game showing that he treated the botanist at one stage for his own illnesses. So where does that leave us in the main plot? Well, after killing all the bosses in your quest for revenge, you will get the bad ending. Obviously, I mean, did you expect to get rewarded for getting revenge? It seems to be implied that the canon story is that your character goes through their revenge quest, killing all the bosses, only to regret it afterwards, and so the power of the talisman takes them back so that they can do it all over again. At least, that's my interpretation. The chances of you learning all the important information and getting the good ending on your first run without a guide are so low, it's the only thing that makes sense to me. So how do you get the good ending? By sparing the bosses, of course, but how the hell do you do that? Well, instead of just doing the finisher when it shows up like you normally would, when you break their structure, just wait. Eventually their structure will go back down a bit and you will need to break their structure a second time. Only after doing this will you get the option to spare them. The best way to do this is by fighting them without using weapons and not attacking while they are in the stunned phase, as if you get their health to 0, you will kill them and fail. You will need to go through the game sparing every single boss leading up to Yang. Reaching the leader and sparing him, however, a slightly different scenario will play out. A third phase, the only one in the game. In this fight, you have no health bar, just your structure, so it's only a matter of time before you win. Once you do, you go to deliver the final blow, just as Yang did to your father, and then you stop. And in doing so, achieve Wuda. This means martial morality. By choosing to spare the bosses instead of killing them, you are achieving a kind of inner peace, and in doing so, you fall to the ground. Waking up in a place you don't recognize, you go outside, finding yourself on some rocky cliffs. Ascending, you see a slow wind blowing through the sky and you reach the highest point, the sun shining on your face. And as your character takes on a last sigh of relief, the game ends. You didn't just pass out, this is the moment you died, but in achieving true peace, you have died honorably. But there is one last moment to speak of. In a final cutscene, a mystery individual is shown rising from a chair to greet a child, one that appears to be a student. And as they leave, the talisman is left on the chair, revealing a single darkened coin. There are a few ways to interpret this ending, be it us achieving peace and dying but using the talisman to revive ourselves again, or perhaps Yang himself revived us, something we know he can do based on his boss fight intro. Regardless of what the answer is, I don't think it really matters. Personally, I enjoy having things that I can try to figure out and understand on my own, although there are some things in this game that are definitely a bit too ambiguous for their own good. Now yes, I do have some issues with the plot and characters. Like I said, despite their differences in design, the characters don't speak nor act much differently from each other. The ambiguous nature of the story could be endearing for some, but also very frustrating for others. Sifu also does a pretty poor job at introducing the concept of sparing to the game. Without experimenting or trial and error, I doubt most people would discover this as an option on their own. To add to this, the ludonarrative dissonance argument does ring true to this story. The game wants you to spare the bosses that caused your character's plight, but you can absolutely murder as many people as you want in the levels themselves, and it doesn't really care. I mean, yeah, for some of the punches and kicks you could argue these people will be fine, but when I'm straight up stabbing people, it gets a little ridiculous. Sifu is a great game. It has its minor problems in gameplay and story, but none of these issues had a big impact on its overall quality. Its difficulty is tough but fair, and its visual style is incredible, and I'd consider it a benchmark for all 3D beat-em-ups. If you're willing to push your way through the difficult fights, I believe you'll find an experience you'll really like, and at bare minimum, a type of game you can't find anywhere else. Thanks for watching. It's been really encouraging to see the support on the Fear 3 video, especially new people just discovering my channel for the first time. I had a lot of fun with this game, it felt good to try something different. The next one is going to be a little bit more in line with my usual genres, so stay tuned for that. And of course, if you've got suggestions for videos or just want to send me memes, I leave my email in the description so I'm easy to get a hold of. Until next time, ta-ta.